fucking this again. Not again.
It's 10 o'clock in the morning and you're drunk already!
I had a beer on the way home from work, okay? A couple beers.
A couple of beers is in the month! It's not even down!
Out of your shit!
God!
Every fucking morning is shit.
I can't take this anymore.
Don't take it! Don't take it! I don't fucking need
I'm
that.
out of here. I'm
What's
leaving.
this shit?
I'm leaving.
What's this? I come home, the fucking laundry's not done. Look at this place. It's a fucking mess. I don't need this.
I don't need it either.
What do you fucking do all day
I don't
when
need
I'm at work?
it
What do you
either.
do when I'm at work?
I work all day long.
As every law enforcement officer in America knows, when it comes to dealing with domestic disputes, there's always a potential for violence that can end up being directed at you. We know that's true because out of the approximately 60,000 assaults on officers every year, far and away the greatest number occur during responses to domestic disputes. And of those officers who are killed every year, it's well established that dealing with a domestic dispute is very often when it happens.
I just can't take it.
Leave! Get out of here! I don't need you!
If you could just...
What you're going to see here are cases that illustrate the important results of a study that analyzed every single case in the U.S. of an officer killed on a domestic dispute over a 10-year period. The hope, of course, is that what we've been able to learn from the past will even better prepare you for what you might personally experience in the future. For example, if you remember nothing else from this program, remember this. The study discovered that if you're in danger of being killed on a domestic dispute, statistically, the first minute is the most dangerous.
Oh, what's this? What's this?
I called the police.
Oh, you did,
I
did it?
called the
Okay.
police.
This case that comes out of the South is a good example of a great number of cases where the killer, while in an extremely agitated frame of mind, saw the officers arriving and reacted violently. Here's another point worth remembering. Of all the officers killed during the first minute on domestic calls, the study determined that the most died while approaching the location. In this case, also from the South, what the officer was walking into was no longer a domestic dispute, but instead the scene of a murder, where one disputant had killed another and did not have a chance to get away before the officer arrived.
Anybody home? Fuck you!
Because when you first arrive, you have not had a chance to assess what you're walking into, and because 81% of the killers in the study were armed and often knew the officers were coming, the importance of employing good approach tactics to each and every domestic dispute call cannot be overemphasized. Of those officers who were killed approaching the residence, half of them were killed as they got out of their car, and further investigation revealed that almost all of those officers had parked their car in plain view of the residence, which of course gave the killer an easy opportunity to shoot him. Now, the second half of the officers who were killed during the approach were shot when they got very close to the residence, and further investigation revealed that almost all of those officers failed to use normal approach tactics, like using cover, waiting, assessing, listening, and scanning. For example, in the Midwest, the backup officer was sent to the backyard because the first responding officers could not locate the disputant, but he did. Because this officer had focused on the building and had not scanned the entire area as he approached, he was able to be ambushed. This officer was not alone. 10% of the killers in the study were hiding outside the residence. The reason more officers are killed during the first minute on a domestic dispute call than at any other time during the call is because the study indicated that most of the killers intended to kill the officer at the first opportunity, because they were uncontrollably angry or mentally ill, or because they had just committed a crime. That's why most officers were killed while approaching, and the second most died at initial contact with the killer.
You guys so long. He's in there, he's drunk. He's gonna kill me this time. I know he is.
This case, that comes from the West, is a very good example of what happened in a number of cases where the officer died relatively soon after encountering the killer. As the officers were talking with the reporting party, who was the wife, the husband came out of the house.
Well,
In this case, As in similar cases, the husband's first real opportunity was when he got right up close to the officers. In the East, 2 officers were dispatched to a house that one of them had been to before.
Hey, hold right there, asshole!
The older officer had once testified against this man, which helped send him to prison. Now he was out and seeking revenge.
You don't remember me, do you, shitface?
Returning to a location where the suspect had a prior bad experience with the officer is, of course, always considered potentially dangerous.
Worth it!
Hey, how do you like it? Get away, get away!
Surprisingly, the study discovered that in 41% of the cases, the officers had at least some indication of danger before they arrived or as they arrived. And the evidence suggests that if those officers had reacted with heightened caution, most might have avoided what happened to this officer. Incidentally, when the officers decided the man was definitely going to shoot, they chose to run in opposite directions as opposed to any other tactic they might have chosen. And though one died, in the confusion, one did get away. Other indications of danger identified in the study include cases where the individual was known to have mental problems and a tendency toward violence, or the individual was seen brandishing a weapon, or shots had been fired.
Police department, open the door, please.
What do you want?
I got a call of a disturbance. Will you please open the door?
Everything's fine.
In this case, from the Midwest, the indication of danger was that the phone had gone dead while a woman was telling the dispatcher about the dispute.
Door now.
We're gonna be wait.
Ma'am, I got a call of a disturbance in here.
Everything's fine.
Are you sure everything's okay in here?
Everything's fine.
Obviously, another indication of danger was the reluctance of the residents to let the officer see what was going on inside.
Come in here.
Ma'am, I need to come in.
As you've just seen, the officer's attempt to enter the residence by force was resisted with violence. And it's worth noting that in the past, that's happened a lot. The study showed clearly that many officers died while trying to establish control of the situation.
Hey, evening, what's wrong here?
In the Northwest, unknown to the husband and his brother, a wife had called the sheriff to report abuse.
Come on, man.
Come on in. He hit me today, and I'm tired of it. He hits me all the time, and I don't want him here anymore. I want him out of here.
Calm down.
When it became known why the deputy was there, the interaction among all the participants began to heat up, and the deputy's attempt to forcibly establish control had the opposite effect of inciting the brothers to violence. It's symbolically meaningful that this officer was hit over the head and stunned with a beer bottle. It should come as no surprise that alcohol was present and a contributing factor to the violence in most cases.
Oh my God! What'd you do, you idiot?
It's something you can never forget. Another contributing factor to violent resistance when the officer attempted to establish control was the fact that the officer was often alone, like the one who tried to stop a marital dispute outside a bar. Even though the majority of officers who were killed while alone were very experienced and had an average of more than 4 years of service in law enforcement, the evidence strongly suggests that impatience on the officer's part was also a possible factor that often contributed to the officer being attacked.
Come on in here, guys. Thank you. This is where I need you.
Here's another fact worth keeping in mind. 44% of the domestic disputes in which officers were killed were not marital disputes. There were also fathers fighting sons, sons fighting mothers, and of course, lots of cases of in-laws fighting each other. As in this case from the Southwest, where an angry homeowner wanted his mentally ill brother-in-law thrown out of the house.
You're going to have to get your stuff.
I don't have to go anywhere. I'm waiting for my sister. I'm waiting for my sister.
You should also be aware that in the past, 22% of the officers died during a conversation with their
You're
assailant.
going to have to leave, sir. This is his
I'm
house.
waiting for my... Okay.
Okay?
Screw you.
Get out.
Screw you.
Out. Sir, I need to go with you.
By the way, of those officers who died during the conversation, it most frequently happened something like this. This killer, like others in the study, was able to obtain a weapon because he had been able to momentarily elude the control of the responding officers. The study confirmed that it's extremely important to restrict and closely supervise all movement during a domestic dispute.
We got a call from some of your neighbors who are kind of concerned, say there's some fighting and arguing going on over here.
Yeah, it's all over. She took the kids and left.
A case from the West exemplifies one of the more troubling findings of the study. The evidence suggests that many of the killers had become temporarily emotionally unstable during the time of their assault. For example, in this case, the man was drunk, very emotional, and extremely despondent because his wife had just packed up and left.
You're not going in my house. I told you she left.
You got some identification on you, Richard? Your
Yeah.
driver's license ID?
Yeah. I've got your identification.
Surprisingly, a total of 57% of those who killed officers on domestic disputes were essentially suicidal because they either attacked the officers in a way which was sure to lead to their own death, or, as in this case, which was even more common, after they had killed the officers in an explosion of uncontrolled emotion, they then killed themselves. This phenomenon reinforces how tactically important it is to continually assess the emotional states of all participants in domestic disputes.
Let me talk to you a minute.
Hang on here a second. You certain you want your husband?
Yes.
It's well established that when officers attempt to make an arrest, it can be potentially dangerous if the suspect resists. This case from the South illustrates why many officers died making arrests on domestic disputes.
Get out of here. Turn on. Turn on. Get out.
As you saw, when the suspect resisted, instead of backing off and calming things down, the officer persisted. With this result, as in a number of cases, because he persisted, he was suddenly overpowered, beaten senseless, and then disarmed and killed.
Look, this is all bullshit.
Another important fact worth remembering is that most officers who died making arrests were not alone, as in this case from the Midwest, where it all began when one officer moved to handcuff the suspect. Within 2 seconds, both officers were dead. When making arrests, the majority of officers died while handcuffing, so it stands to reason that proper handcuffing technique should never be compromised, and all officers on the scene must stay alert and involved in the handcuffing process. And finally, a case that comes out of the West is an excellent example of one of the most important findings of the study. In this case, a father was very angry with his daughter, but eventually one of the officers was able to convince him to go back in the house and calm down. And when he did, for the officers, the problem was essentially over. Then suddenly it wasn't. The study discovered that in many cases like this one, events occurred causing officers to be killed which could not be predicted, like being shot by one of the children, or the person who drove by, or the neighbor, or the wife. In other words, the study confirmed how important it really is to always stay alert for the unexpected.
I'm tired of your harping. I'm tired of you harping on me all the time.
As was said at the beginning, every experienced law enforcement officer knows that when it comes to dealing with domestic disputes, there is always a potential for violence that can end up being directed at you. As a result, most agencies have designed tactics that you have to remember to successfully handle the situation. And the study of officers killed on domestic disputes shows that there are some things that you should absolutely never forget. Because in the past, most officers died while approaching or at first contact, it's important to never forget that statistically, the first minute is the most dangerous.
May I come in and check on you?
There's no need for that. Everything is fine.
Because many of the officers who died do not appear to have altered their tactics in the presence of an indication of possible violence, it is important to remember to react to any sign of danger.
What's going on here?
Because many officers died when trying to establish control, it's important to be patient.
Who are you?
Oh, sir, I need to go with you when you're ready.
Hey, I'm gonna get a shirt.
Because many of the killers obtained weapons when they momentarily eluded control of the officers, it is important to restrict all movement.
I told you she left.
Because so many of the killers were emotionally unstable and essentially suicidal at the moment of the attack,
Identification.
it is important to continually assess each individual.
Yeah, but don't come back.
And finally, since the study discovered many cases where the events leading to the officer's death could not be easily predicted, it's crucial for you to never forget to stay alert for the unexpected.